Hi, and welcome to Books in Action. My name is Larry Petraccaro, and I have with me today Tina Kelley. We're lucky to have her. Tina is a poet. She grew up in New Jersey, and then she took a rather circuitous route back to New Jersey. She attended Yale University, worked as a journalist in Seattle and Philadelphia. She's also a former New York Times reporter who worked on the paper's Metro desk for 10 years, and she belonged to the team that won a Pulitzer Prize in public service for the paper's coverage of the September 11th attacks. She wrote 121 Portraits of Grief, brief profiles of the victims, which appeared in the book Portraits, 9/11/2001. Her first book of nonfiction about homeless youth and how to keep young people off the streets was co-authored with Kevin Ryan, the CEO of Covenant House. Her first book of poetry, The Gospel of Galore, won a 2003 Washington State Book Award, and her second poetry collection, Precise, appeared in 2012 from Word Press in Cincinnati. Her poems have appeared in the Best American Poetry 2009, Southwest Review, Prairie Schooner, and the Journal of the American Medical Association, along with other publications. Her latest book of poetry is Rise Wildly. And she has won the Maplewood Ideas Festival's Literary Award in 2019. So Tina, thank you for joining us. And that thing about the American Medical Association, I thought there should be something witty to say about the tie-in between medicine and poetry, but I actually couldn't think of anything. So I guess we'll have to get serious from here on out. Just doing a little bit of looking in research prior to doing this, I noted that you had been adopted, and you found out at the age of 3 that you were adopted. Has this the fact of your adoption, has this had an impact on your poetry, or even more importantly, has it helped form the person you are?
I've written poetry about being adopted on occasion. It's not an obsession of mine, but I do think it is part of a thread about homes and homelessness that runs through my interests and my writing. I think I have a sense of real luck in landing in the family that I did. When I was writing about homeless kids, I realized most of them had not grown up in their biological families, and some of them had been adopted early on. And it was very random that I should end up with the family that I did end up with. And they were very loving and very generous and helped me follow my dreams. So I feel maybe a little bit of survivor guilt and maybe a little bit of extra interest in the issue of homes and homelessness.
Well, when you were writing the book about the homeless youth, I guess in New York City, that connection that many of them had been adopted or had not grown up with their birth parents, I think that's what I heard you say. Was that did I get that right?
Yeah.
Oh, was that a bit of a surprise, or is one question, and was there anything common about their experience, very different from yours, for example, or not?
Well, a lot of the kids who are at Covenant House are there because they've aged out of foster care. So I think, and the book covers kids from around the US because there's a large number of shelters run by Covenant House in the US, Canada, and Central America. So I didn't have a lot in common with them because I had landed so luckily in a very comfortable home. But I do think that what surprised me was how much the kids who had been in foster care wanted to get back to the homes of origin, even if those homes had treated them cruelly. And that was the big eureka moment for me, was that a child who'd been, very badly burned at age a year and a half sort of still blamed himself for that and would cross a busy highway to try to get back home to his birth mother, his family of origin.
Did you have any feeling as to why that was? Were they missing something? Or, I mean, it seems so almost counterintuitive.
Yeah, it does. But it's I think little ones internalize the messages and they think that they're at fault, even though they're not. Another aspect of that book was I got to sit in on the reunion of a young man who was 26 at the time and his birth mother, who he hadn't seen for 22 years at that point. So I was at the luggage carol in O'Hare with her, waiting for him to get off the plane
Huh.
and for them to see each other for the first time. And that was magical. That was really one of the highlights of my reporting career ever, to be able to be on the front row of that interaction. And the mom I'm still in touch with. I'm still in touch with both of them. But at the end of that reporting trip, she thanked me for being there, which also blew me away, because I think I was asking questions and keeping the conversation going. And some of those conversations weren't ones that she might have had with him if I hadn't been there, bringing up stuff that I had known from talking to him earlier. And I
Hmm.
think it sort of made the reunion possibly a little easier for them, which I felt very happy about.
Well, yeah, it's nice to be able to do something positive. You've done a number of work with NGOs, haven't you? Is that at least I thought that's what I read. Is that also because of the adoptive experience? You're trying to they can return something, or is it just maybe your personality the way it is?
I've written a lot about nonprofits because I think I like writing about solutions
Hmm.
to problems, to social problems. And I hate reading articles and books where I feel like I'm bludgeoned by all the bad news. I like leaving readers with some ideas about what they can do to help make things better. Sometimes the reading material that you run across in the news is a little too depressing and overwhelming.
Yeah, yeah, I guess what do they say? Bad news sells, or I don't know whether it's sensationalism, but I think I know what you mean. It's
Yeah.
you can run into it. So how, in terms of acting, you've been doing a few things during this pandemic, which has been, kind of an awkward thing for most of us. Perhaps for some of us, not as awkward as others. But how have you been keeping busy?
The first several months of the pandemic, I was working many hours a day, maybe 4 or 5 hours a day, helping the Soma Sewing Volunteers, which is a Facebook group. And it's the folks who have been volunteering to make reusable face masks that we've distributed to hospitals and nonprofits and shelters and the Navajo Nation. And
Hmm.
our last count, I wasn't the only one doing this. There were a bunch of us, but the woman who keeps track said that we have done 45,000 masks.
Wow.
um, yeah, so it's been based on my front porch. I have a closed-in front porch, and so that's where people would donate fabric and elastic and pick up quarantined fabric to sew. So we had a whole production line where stuff would come in and then sit in my garage for 4 days to make sure the materials didn't have any COVID on them, and then go back out. And it's made me so happy because it's been a wonderful group of people who wanted to help and decided to help and put in just tons of hours voluntarily keeping their neighbors safe.
Oh, that's wonderful. I mean, you mentioned the Navajo Nation. Was that just something that happened kind of automatically, or is that perhaps a particular interest of yours that might be something you'd want to explore more deeply? What happens on the reservation areas of the United States?
What happened was they had put out a call for help for
Uh,
PPE because they were not provided with it, and they had some of the Native American tribes had a lot of problems with the lack of running water and a lack of medical care and medical facilities. So it was the group's decision that when they saw that call for masks, that we would, I think we sent them at least 1,000 and maybe more.
hmm, that's a lot of masks. Yeah. The have you been doing anything with poetry related to outreach to people, or as opposed to poetry where you're actually working on it yourself?
I am working on applying for a volunteer position, not a full-time position, but a volunteer job as running a poetry workshop at Covenant House. So I'm waiting for my fingerprints to come back. They have to do the background check before that happens.
Okay.
But I'm hoping to do that. I've done that 1 or 2 times at the shelter in Newark, and the kids there are so creative and so gifted. My co-author would always say the least interesting thing about them is the fact that they're homeless. As young people, they've had so many, hard experiences, but still come through with a great deal of creativity, and they're remarkable young people.
I didn't realize Covenant House had a facility in Newark.
Yep, they have one in Montclair and Asbury Park and Camden and Atlantic City and Elizabeth.
I didn't realize. I thought it was just the one in New York City. That was the one that I was familiar with. But
Yeah.
well, that they must have. I guess they've grown over the years.
Yeah, they really have.
And how long have you been involved with them?
Well, actually, I started volunteering for them in 1986, right out of college, when I lived in New York. And then I came back to them to write the book. And then while I was there and after that, I've done some mentoring with them, and that they've been one of my volunteer missions, one of the places I like to volunteer for.
Oh, that's wonderful. So if you get this grant, you'll be helping teaching them to write poetry, or they probably have stories.
It's not a grant. It would just be me volunteering. So
oh, okay.
All I need to know is I just need the go ahead to be a full-fledged volunteer. I've got the training.
Okay. Well, let's maybe we should talk a little bit about poetry too. We can. So, what got you interested in poetry? Were you a poet before you became a journalist, or
I was a poet before I became a third grader. Basically, I had a second grade teacher, Mrs. Price, who liked the poems I wrote and made a fuss about it, and so I kept writing. I did a bunch in fifth grade. I got it in the school newspaper, and it's sort of been a love of mine ever since. It's what I do when I have a little bit of free time. And lately I've been trying to spend more and more time on it through my writers groups, and following my uncle's goal of writing a poem a week. So
was that your uncle's goal?
Yeah, he's actually my uncle-in-law. He's in Glen Ridge, and he's a fine poet, and that's his goal, to do a poem a week. And I thought, that's really good. Let me see if I can do that. So I haven't really succeeded.
Did you keep any of your older poems?
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at them now, do you see any commonality in them, or?
I did a lot of rhyming back in the 60s and 70s, so I'm doing much less rhyming now, but some of them had a moment or two of good writing in them, from back in the day.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's funny, I think, how I've known a lot of kids over my years, if you will, and it's funny how some of them kind of are aimless, and some of them, from like the time it seems like they're 3 years old, they want to know exactly what they want to do. I'm always amazed by that. We're going to have to take a break. I was all set to launch into a question which would last longer than the 30 seconds we have. So if you'll bear with me, we'll get started on the other end. So if you at the audience will stay with us, we'll be back in about a minute. Thank you. Hi, welcome back to Books in Action. This is Larry Petraccaro with Tina Kelley, and we've been talking poetry. At least we've been talking a little bit of poetry, but we're talking about a lot of other stuff as well. So I think maybe we'll touch a little bit on poetry. You said you started writing in the third grade, and those poems tended to rhyme. I think, as a non-poet, I tend to think of poems as they're supposed to rhyme, but then I learned later that they don't always have to rhyme. So you started writing early. How has your poetry evolved, and what do you think makes a good poem?
When I'm reading a poem, what I really love most is very accurate language and metaphor. I love it when two things are compared to each other that I wouldn't usually have thought of. And I love the playfulness of supposition. My favorite poet is Patty Ann Rogers, who writes about nature, and she just plays around with concepts like, what do whales learn from a field of iris? Or what would it be like if your father were a red bird? How would your life be different? And just crazy suppositions that she gets very playful with. That's something that I enjoy in poetry. I also very much enjoy going down the rabbit hole of research and learning a lot about a new concept with the help of the internet. So at one point I saw a picture of it was a garbage blog, a blog related to garbage, and it showed a white lawn chair, plastic lawn chair at the very bottom of the ocean. And one of the exploring robot submarines had been down at the bottom somewhere in the Pacific and found this lawn chair sitting there. And I spent a day reading all the links that were connected to this particular blog post, and I got a poem out of it. And that day spent learning all these new words about the undersea world, and learning about whale falls, which are where whales die and their bones land at the bottom, and then all sorts of other debris is attracted to the whale and sort of hangs in around the whale, and the robots go down and look and see what goes on there, and it's its own separate little ecosystem. All these crazy things that you can learn just from starting in one picture of a chair. So that's some of the joy that I get out of the process of writing poetry.
Is that exploration?
Yeah, it's a lot like journalism when you're sent out on a story to go learn everything about something that you know nothing about in the morning, and by 6 o'clock you're supposed to have a story written.
You'd probably write a poem about that, maybe.
Yes.
They're mostly
I've written poems about journalism for sure.
Oh, okay. You mentioned that you saw the thing about the lawn chair on a blog, I think you said, but do you have your own blog?
I do. I have a blog about my poetry news, tinakelleypoetry.wordpress.com. And it actually also has, because it was the quickest place I could put it, it has directions on how to hand sew your own masks, because we had to have a good link for that. And I need to keep it up a little bit better than I do. But when I have publications that are online, I often will put out a blog post.
Well, yeah, I guess you want to keep people up to date. Your most recent book of poetry is Rising Wildly. Does the title is that indicative of what's in the book, or is that just coincidental?
There's a poem that came from a headline in the New York Times called "Trains Running After Storms." And it meant the trains were back running again now that the storms were past. But I liked the idea of trains actually chasing the storms. And so I wrote a poem about trains chasing after the storms and flying through the air, following the hurricanes. So that's where there was an instruction to the train to rise wildly. And I liked that title because it kind of offset some of the other aspects of the book. A lot of it has to do with my mother's death in 2016. A lot of it has to do with reporting that I'd done, some of which is more difficult, about homeless people and other tragedies. And I wanted there to be an upbeat theme running throughout, despite all that.
Well, the idea of trains flying through the air is kind of interesting. And I this came out of Hurricane Sandy, I take it then?
Oh no, this was back in the 90s, I think.
Oh, really? Before that? Okay,
Yeah,
because I remember there.
97, some storm that I read about in Seattle when I was living in Seattle.
Ah, okay. Yeah, speaking of living in Seattle, one of the things I wondered about, you've had exposure to the people in Philadelphia, the people in Seattle, the people in New York and Jersey. do you find more commonality, or do you find some kind of identifiable distinctions between those areas?
It's funny. When I moved back to New Jersey or to the New York area from Seattle, I really felt like I had come home. In Seattle, people, if you're a reporter asking people on the street for their opinion, they're very shy and reticent. They don't really want to tell you what they think. And I remember doing weather stories about, oh, it's the 20th sunny day straight in February. And what do you think about that? And I was just so mortified to have to go up to strangers to talk about that, because I knew the strangers didn't want to talk about that. And then I came home to New York, and my first story for the Times was about a restaurant closing on Avenue of the Americas. It was called Hurley's. And it was a very popular lunch spot in Midtown. And people were just so wonderfully opinionated in how it was just the most terrible thing. And they were slamming their table with their beers, and they were so happy to talk about how awful this was. And I thought, oh, I'm back with my people, people who are actually going to tell you how they feel. But the flip side of that is I became a real outdoors person in Seattle, and I loved to camp and kayak, and I wrote a column about outdoor sports for the Seattle Times. And now when we are talking to our friends about going camping, they're a little bit puzzled that we actually want to sleep outside. So that's the flip side.
Okay. All right. So you did bring something back. I'd like to talk a little bit about your book, Breaking Barriers, How P-Tech Schools Create a Pathway from High School to College to Career. Not even sure if I know what a P-Tech school is. Maybe we could start with that.
The P-Tech model, it stands for Pathways in Technology, Early College, High School. And there are 3 of them in New Jersey. Their flagship school opened in Crown Heights in 2011. And it's the result of a public-private collaboration among a public school, a community college, and a business. And the business needs qualified young people in the technology fields. So they work with the community college for an associate degree that they can use among their new hires. And then the community college works with the business and the high school to create a curriculum so that kids can go from 9th grade through a free associate's degree in a 6-year program, all the while being guided by volunteers from the corporation or business to help them with mentorships and internships. And so after 6 years, and oftentimes the kids go through faster, they are eligible to be first in line for a job that has a great deal of growth potential. And the beauty of it is you don't have to take a test to get into this school. You can be way behind as an 8th grader and still get this very supported pathway from 9th grade into an entry-level job with a great deal of upward mobility.
Do you find that appeals maybe to a certain type of student? And the reason I ask the question is because, looking at kids in the 9th grade to kind of chart their life path seems a little peculiar to me. Maybe peculiar is not the right word. I don't know what the right word is, but is that not an issue?
It's a great question, and it's been raised a lot. We're not asking kids to decide to become electrical engineers at age 13. We are providing the kids with the technology, with the computer skills, with the workplace skills, how to give presentations, all problem-solving skills that are very transferable to a large number of fields. So of the kids that have gone through in the Brooklyn School, 80% went on to get a college degree. They didn't, a 4-year college degree. They didn't go into the entry-level job at the business. And a lot of them have gone into other fields, but they're armed with these skills on how to write a business email, how to make a PowerPoint, how to, do really great things on a computer. So some of them really are future engineers. The young man that I profiled in the book who lives in New Brunswick at the New Brunswick School, he played with Legos from when he was born, and that's all he wanted to do was put things together. But there are a lot of kids who go into this program as artists, but they like the idea of a free 2-year degree. And they're able to use their art skills in a corporate design setting or turn into, some of them are going to veterinary school or medical school because they find their passion, but it's directed to kids who are socioeconomically challenged, and also to schools where there's a high percentage of kids of color, because those kids have historically not been served well. So, and those kids are also the future employees that the companies are looking for as they want to make their workforce reflect the country better. So the high school graduation rates have been very, very high. None of them has needed a remedial college class. And they leave with debt-free, an associate degree, and also the ability to go on to college or to a career.
Well, do you see this then as something that some of the elements you've talked about certainly sound like they should be in what we might consider a traditional high school?
Yeah.
Do you see this as perhaps the a model that can be, if not wholly placed into the high schools, something that the better elements of it can be?
Well, the founding principal, who gets the last word in the book because he writes the afterword, I think the last line of the book is, every school should be a P-Tech. That's his view. And
it sounds it.
there are the support that the kids get, the counseling, the tutoring. They're watched their grades are monitored very closely. So if they start to have trouble, they can get mentors and help after school. I wish that my kids had been able to choose that option. And I think there are many, many aspects of it that could be wonderful for any public school.
No, it sounds that way to me. I mean, it's, I would tell people if they ask that, if you want to have a steady job, be a carpenter or something. I mean, you can't offshore that, but it does sound, when is the book going to be out?
June 25th.
Okay. Yeah, I hope some of that does get transferred. Yeah, it sounds well worthwhile. I had another question, but we've only got 30 seconds left. So if you can, in 30 seconds, was there any one of the stories that you wrote in Portraits of Grief that really stuck with you?
Yeah, there was the woman whose husband, who passed away in 9/11, her husband used to pick up her kid and play him like a banjo. And she wasn't strong enough to do that physically after he passed away. And that just hit me in the gut. And partly because my husband played banjo at the time. And it was just such a human, tragic detail that it's haunted me ever since.
Yeah, just a little one. Well, I guess that's it. So, Tina, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you out there watching Books in Action. This is Larry Petraccaro with Tina Kelley, and we'll hope you'll come back.